Welcome everyone to Talking Textiles. I'm Erin Parker Tillery, Ph.D. student and graduate research and teaching assistant at North Carolina State University's Wilson College of Textiles and a member of ATA's student division. The goal of this podcast is to get to know the wide variety of positions and markets that make the advanced textiles world run. We will be talking to professionals in different roles throughout this series to help inspire the next generation of textile professionals and anyone interested in learning about others' journey in the world of textiles. ATA offers advanced textiles content throughout the year. Please visit textiles.org/events to learn more. On today's episode, we are speaking to Prateeti Ugale, Ph.D. student in Fiber and Polymer Science at North Carolina State University. She will be discussing her doctoral research and plans after graduation. And now, let's talk textiles. Hi, I'm Erin Parker Tillery. Today, our guest is Prateeti Ugale. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Erin. Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to have you here. So I know that you have a lot of experience in textiles and specifically E-Textiles. So let's get started today. Could you maybe give us an insight into what you have worked on and why specifically E-Textiles is so interesting to you?
Yeah, to give you a brief background about myself, I am currently a PhD student at NC State, and I'm working on integrating technology into textile structures and particularly wearable applications. So, like you said, e-textiles. Before I started my PhD, I did work in textile industry for about 3 years. I started working at a fabric sourcing company, and then I went on researching and developing different textile scaffolds for, creating sustainable materials and implantable medical textile devices. So, yeah, I took on several roles in the past, and now as a PhD student, I'm working on electronic textiles. And I think textiles do have an ability to do a lot more than just, clothing and protecting us, which is the basic functionality. But I am super passionate about merging the technology with textiles and what textiles can do more. This is why I feel e-textiles are super fascinating to me because they can just blend the traditional textile manufacturing with cutting edge technology today and then creating a new frontier for innovation. And yeah, the idea of transforming fabric into, for example, integrating sensors or having it communicate with different devices, for example, for healthcare monitoring, super like excites me a lot. So I think that's why it draws my attention 'cause it has so much impact. It can do so much more than just clothing.
Absolutely. So e-textiles is definitely an up and coming area in the textile space. And you talked a little bit about your interest in healthcare, but could you maybe elaborate on some of the opportunities and areas where that you see these technologies can be used?
Yeah, definitely. So healthcare is just one, but I feel e-textile market is really growing and there are various applications it can be applied to. So, for example, healthcare is one, but there's also sports and fitness, and military and defense, and also consumer electronics. So, I think all these markets are really driving the growth of e-textiles. And I think especially healthcare and military, I would say, because a lot of technological advancements are happening in these two industries because of the growing R&D and the whole Internet of Things integration, and because we are all now working towards more lightweight and durable materials. So that is another, I would say, fact that is driving this research. And then definitely for healthcare especially, so I'm currently working on a project where I'm trying to embed printed sensors in textiles. And then my focus, like my research, is focusing on making interconnects so that these sensors can be connected to our phones or laptops, and then you can actually see the data that these sensors are sensing on your body. So that's one example that I can give for healthcare monitoring, but there are also like other, you can do ECG monitoring or EMG monitoring to detect anomalies like early. So that can give a valuable insight to the healthcare professionals and as well as, patients that are going through some physical therapy or rehabilitation, for example.
Yeah, so let's get into talking about your research because it's very, very cool stuff. So why don't you go ahead and give us an overview of exactly what you're doing, and then maybe also talk about what inspired you to think about interconnects in this new way.
I think interconnects are okay. Let me start with the components of e-textiles, right? It definitely requires textile substrate, but you also need other technological, or I would say electrical components like sensors and interconnects. And when I say interconnects, what I mean is these are basically conductive paths or connections that are integrated into the textile materials, and then they can enable the transmission of signal, or they can also supply power to the electronic components on e-textiles. So, like, for example, I mentioned an example system previously. So let's just take EMG, that is electromyography. So your nervous system is continuously sending signals to your muscles to make any movement. And then once these textile sensors, because they are really not like invasive method, like the traditional method where you use needles to pierce into the muscles. So it's more like non-invasive sensors, which is why the signal that they get from our body is super low. So it's important that this signal is like transmitted with the highest quality to get it processed and amplified later. So this is what basically interconnects are. And the nature of it is the the shorter it is, the better. So that was the motivation behind it. So I'm not just working on making transmission lines or text on textiles or printed lines on textiles, but this is more about making the connection shorter. So I was like, hey, what if we make an interconnect that not just routes on the surface of the textiles, but rather goes through the thickness of the textiles than on the surface. So that was my idea, and currently I'm working on making that possible and improving those interconnects. And my inspiration also came from actually vertical interconnects, or vias, are very commonly seen in electronic industry, for example, printed circuit boards or integrated circuits in semiconductor devices. And those industries use a lot of VS. So I was like, okay, that is interesting, but that's more of a rigid substrate. So how would a VIA look like in a textile substrate? So I think that was pretty interesting for me, and that's why I'm doing this research.
That's awesome. So at this point in your research, surely there have been some challenges along the way. E-textiles can be pretty complicated. So can you talk about maybe some challenges you faced or even also your validation efforts for your new technology?
Yeah, so it all started with how do I even make these in the first place? So picking and choosing the right material was a challenge. The process that I'm using right now is, so I use thermoplastic polyurethane films and then heat press it on the top and bottom of the textile substrate. So the substrate I'm evaluating right now is knit fabrics, which is really challenging, I feel, as compared to wovens and non-wovens because they stretch in different directions. So I think I just wanted to take a look how that would look like. So yeah, definitely heat pressing thermoplastic polyurethane film and then using the laser cutting technology to kind of make a hole in this substrate and then fill it with silver ink, like silver chloride. So that's the ink I am using right now. And then, yeah, make that connection from the top, like the face of the fabric, through the via to the bottom of the fabric, and try to use certain components that can evaluate that, hey, this is working. So I tried 3 demos to see if it works. The first one was kind of making strategic switch on a woven fabric where you cannot see the circuitry. The circuitry is on the back of the fabric, it's hidden. But then when you touch the switch on that fabric, the LED glows. So you can see the LED glow, but like without having any circuitry. You don't see the circuitry on the fabric. So that was the first step where I was like, okay, hey, this is actually working. So that is great. And then I also wanted to see, so another thing about interconnects is we want them to have really low resistance. because if the resistance is high, there's gonna be heat dissipation and the fabric is gonna start heating, which is definitely not safe. So I also wanted to make sure that vias are having low resistance. So another demo that I made was heated fabric, where I used um, high resistance conductive yarn that can actually be the patch that heats up and then connect that through the via using the via interconnect to a battery. So whenever I attached a battery to this textiles, it started heating up the fabric, but through an IR camera, you can only see the patch, like the high resistance conductive yarns heating, but not the via. So that was like a second step, kind of verifying that, hey, these are really low resistance interconnect. So that's like a good thing. And then for the healthcare application, I also tried monitoring EMG using VIAs, and I did get a pretty decent EMG signal through them. So I think the next step would be evaluating or identifying what are the parameters that can improve the VIA and actually like collect some data and then see how, for example, fatigue testing, like stretching or bending of these textiles are influencing the conductivity of these VIAs. And another important aspect actually of e-textiles, and it's also a bottleneck today, is washability because electronic components, when we throw them into the washing machine, hey, we don't know what's going to happen, right? If that's going to work. So that's another test that I'm planning to evaluate. And because vias are not using any rigid materials and also they're encapsulated with plastic polyurethane film, I think they should survive. But that's the next step that I'm going to, yeah, take a look at.
Absolutely. Putting conductive materials in water usually isn't a good idea, but that's what people like you are doing. You're testing it, you're making sure it'll work. Could you maybe also talk about the manufacturability of these vias versus maybe some other kind of e-textile components?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think all the technology that I'm using today, or what every instrument that I'm using today is we do have an equipment for that. For example, heat pressing or laser cutting. There's nothing that I'm doing manually here. Even the penetration of the conductive ink in the via, today I do it with screen printing technology, which is, there are definitely manual machines, but there are also some automated machines out there that can do screen printing. And I'm hoping that in future I can also try to look at some different techniques like direct ink write, which is also pretty like it's pretty automated.
Mhm.
So I'm hoping to use that as well. So I think I think it's definitely manufacturable, but I think it'll be interesting to see how scalable it can be because right now I'm just making samples and maybe some arm sleeves or armband, but VS can have application in various other industries as well. So yeah, I think that would be interesting to see how this process can be scalable, but I think it's pretty manufacturable, I think. I mean, you would still need some need to do some things manually, but I think otherwise it's pretty much manufacturable.
Well, it sounds like it'll fit well within the textile manufacturing process that already exists, since you're maybe not
Mhm.
using any rigid materials, which has been a big challenge for e-textiles so far.
That's correct. Yeah, having snaps and having other rigid objects on textiles and having conductive inks, for example, is not a good idea because these rigid materials can create cracks and then there can be loss of conductivity. So, and that's not something we want for interconnects.
Absolutely, because then your e-textile doesn't work.
Yep.
So, looking to the future, do you think there are any other areas of e-textiles you're interested in exploring, or maybe even what is your plan for your research or even after school is over?
So I'm working on vertical interconnects right now, but I think there are also so many other things I'm learning. But like you said, if I wanted to explore a little bit more in the realm of e-textile, I would really love to learn a little bit more about haptic feedback because I think that's a very interesting technology. And like right now, I'm working on how I can get the signals from these sensors and how we can talk to textiles, but like how can textiles talk back to us, right? And then that can be done using haptic feedback. So I think that would be really, really interesting, and I would love to explore that a little bit more. But after I graduate, I think there are so many things I can do, but I feel like I would like to stay in the research field, whether it's academia or industry, because I think I'm a technical person, so I feel like that would be my go-to option after I graduate.
You
Mhm.
have had some internships before, so you've worked with industry kind of on your research while being a student. Can you give a little insight, maybe specifically to industry members who might want to collaborate either with students or other researchers into, or just give us a little insight into what that process is like?
Yes, I did some summer internship this past summer, but I started applying almost like 8 months before that to just like interviewing. And I think that's another skill to have, like just how to interview. But I think there are a lot of opportunities, and you might not find something that perfectly matches your research. But I think it's important to have those, like, it's important to develop some skills that can be translated to other industries. So I think, like, even being a researcher in e-textile, you can transition to textile industry or electronic industry for that matter, or be, just be a consultant, or like even have your own company, like startup. I think that's another thing pretty popular in e-textile. But yeah, the company I worked for this summer is Impinge, and it basically specializes in rain RFID solutions. And my role was working on how can this technology, the rain RFID technology, how can it enable textile circularity, and like define some tag chip requirements that can enable the tagging of, or rain RFID tagging of textile apparel items, all the way from manufacturing to textile recycling. And honestly, I was like, it was pretty interesting, but I think on so many levels, it's different from what I'm doing. But at the same time, there's so much overlap. So I think keep your options open with open mind, and I think there can be so many opportunities.
Could you
Mhm.
explain your thought process of why you wanted to go back to school after you'd been working in the industry?
Yeah, I feel that. So when I also did my master's from NC State University, and at that time I really got into research, and my advisor had suggested me to convert to PhD. But it's just that I had no industry experience at that point. So I wanted to explore the industry a little bit more. And I thought that was the right time to do it. And I also landed a job. So I was like, why not? Let's do this. Let's take up this opportunity. So I went in the industry, and I feel like textiles has a lot. And I feel like I worked in different industries, but I feel I always wanted to go back to school and get a PhD, and especially like doing something more to e-textile, like to textiles, whether it's sustainability, that is an upcoming topic, or electronic textiles. I think these are really upcoming fields, and I wanted to explore that a little bit more. And I was like, okay, nothing better than coming back to NC State, because the Wilson College of Textile program is one of the best in the country. So, or in the world, I would say. So I was like, okay, I guess this is the right time for me to learn a little bit more and expand my capabilities for textiles, and not just be in that traditional textiles field, but like, yeah, just explore a little bit more.
Mhm. So, has there been anything in your PhD so far that maybe you didn't expect to learn, but that you have learned throughout the process?
I think PhD is a very interesting journey. You don't just learn about the technical aspect, but I think I also learned a lot of perseverance and patience, and I think came across so many failures in the beginning, just with like my experiments, for example. And I think one thing that PhD, I feel like I did not expect was going through this process and surviving this process, because I think it's not a very straightforward thing that, hey, okay, you got into a PhD program, you're doing your PhD, and now you graduate. I think you just learn so many other things So I think that is something I did not really expect. And yeah, I think it just takes like just like all good things take time, I think that is what PhD is. Just a lot of showing a lot of patience with your project and loving what you do. I think that is so important. And I'm also thankful for my advisor, Dr. I think she is really supportive. And I really appreciate that because otherwise this journey would have been tougher.
In your e-textiles research, have you seen any roadblocks or maybe anything that's limiting the growth of e-textiles?
Yeah, I feel like I said, there are so many driving factors for the growth of this market, but I feel there are so many bottlenecks as well. For example, having this complex fabrication method or just facing so many technical difficulties. I think these are, and when I say technical difficulties, I also mean that, making e-textiles durable. I think that is one of the biggest challenge that is been faced right now. And also there are no industry standards or, and like I said, the market acceptance and awareness is also low. So I feel, yeah, once the industry or academia overcomes these technical difficulties and the durability aspect, I think e-textiles has a bright future, I would say.
So, if there are any other students or even industry members who might be listening to this podcast who are interested in e-textiles, could you maybe give them some advice and give them an idea of maybe where to start?
The way I started, and I can tell you from my experience, was I just started reading some, like blog posts and watch YouTube videos because there's great content out there. But if I have to give an advice, I would say that e-textiles is a very interdisciplinary field. So you're not just only learning about textiles, but it's a research at an intersection of textiles, electronics, material science, design, product development. You're looking at all these aspects for a system level integration for the entire e-textile system to work. So definitely like if like try to gain some understanding about all these interdisciplinary fields and then don't be afraid to do some hands-on experiments. It doesn't have to be in the lab, it can also be like some do it yourself or projects at home. And I think that is something that excited me. And from business perspective, I think innovation and practicality of e-textiles is gaining a lot of attention because there is a lot of research going on, but like how can you transition it to business and how can like the practicality aspect of it is something that I think has great potential for e-textiles. So definitely, I think that can, even like trying to do some education because I think that's another thing that lacks. I think that's lacking in e-textile is that people are not aware of these technologies or there is not enough market acceptance. So I think that is something that can also be focused on. But yeah, I think overall just be curious and patient with e-textiles. I think that is the way to go.
So, Prateeti, maybe expanding on what you just said, that the market acceptance is low. It seems like we see news stories every day of the Fitbit or the Aura Ring or just new wearable technology gadgets coming out. But researching in this area seems that might not be something that people are actually ready for. So, could you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely fit and such fitness trackers. These things are out there and they are very widely accepted. But I think when it comes to wearing something on your garment, I think it has a lot to do with comfort and the aesthetic aspect of it. And electronic textiles, even though they can be really interesting to look at, maybe not everybody wants to wear, something that has electronics on it, which is not super comfortable. But they are still different from fitness trackers because that is something you wear, like it's a watch. And I feel like watch versus a garment, the market acceptance can differ. So that's one thing. Another thing is because you're adding these additional functionalities to textile, the cost of the garment can go up. and we are not sure if the customers want to pay that price. And that's why maybe that's also not like a driving factor for e-textiles. So I would say high cost, comfort limitation, and then I feel that, yeah, once the bottleneck of making durable e-textiles and lightweight e-textiles, once we cross that, I think the understanding of e-textile and acceptance might go up, because we're hoping that they will eventually get more comfortable and maybe cheaper. Not sure about that. Yeah, I feel that is the reason why e-textile garments are not super accepted. And yeah, I think comfort and aesthetics of it is the major reason.
Of course, because if you're used to your normal, everyday, comfy jacket, if you've ever held like a heated blanket and all the wires and stuff in there, it makes it a little less comfy. So, similar thing right now, but people like you are trying to overcome those barriers and make it better. So, you're doing great.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of ATA Talking Textiles. ATA is a not-for-profit association representing the international specialty fabrics marketplace. Learn more about events, workshops, and webinars ATA hosts throughout the year at textiles.org/events.